Hi, friends. It's me, Morgan Ruff, and this is another episode of Uplift Conversations. Well, these all came out of the fact that I've really noticed there's just a tad bit of stress in our world right now. So much uncertainty and overwhelm, and yeah, I've been feeling it. And I think for many of us who've been serving in the role of societal change makers, we might have already been feeling run down and burned out, overwhelmed, maybe even unsure of how we were moving forward. And then we've added a global pandemic on top of that, and we're being asked to juggle even more. And oh boy, it's a lot. If you're feeling stressed or anxious or worried or depressed, or maybe you're just feeling all the feelings all at the same time, that's sort of like me, it's okay. You're not alone. These conversations are really my way of supporting this very, very uncomfortable growth period that so many of us are being forced into. So I just thought, well, why don't we explore all those simple life hacks, deep woo woo, self care, and what it means to be really growing in this period of change and uncertainty, and see what comes of them. I just wanted to give a shout out and say, we don't have to do this work alone. There is so much we can learn together. And if you want more, consider jumping over to my Facebook group, Uplift for Passionate Changemakers, where even more great stuff is being stirred up and brought forward. Yay, okay, so I am so excited today to bring this conversation forward to you. Today I'm talking with the Good Grief Network founders, Laura Schmidt and Amee Lewis-Reau. These two women are absolutely incredibly powerful and heart-centered people, and it is so wonderful that I got a chance to speak with them. So the Good Grief Network is essentially a 10-step program that helps people work through a lot of the big emotions that come from all the crazy, chaotic things that are happening in our world. I think it was really founded with the intention of looking at climate change. But we all know, as you look at something like climate change, there's so many things connected to it: social inequity, um, governance. There's it. You know, you look at one issue and you see the challenges with everything else. So I went through this program back tail end of 2019. And one of the things that I really love about it is, though I have access to a lot of the information that we talk about, um, and I think most of us do, I mean, we can all go read the reports and whatnot. I think the harder thing to find is a space that can help you understand our human reactions to that information. So when I read things like the IPCC reports, I get really overwhelmed. I feel incredible grief and sadness. I wonder what I'm doing here on the planet. I mean, all the things come up. And those big emotions are often things that we self isolate with. So we withdraw. We don't really know how to bring them up in conversation. I mean, you don't often go to a happy hour or cocktail hour and be like, so let me talk to you about all that big anger that I'm feeling around how things are going. Or maybe we talk a little bit about anger, but to actually sit with that emotion and process and move it and work with it is something that's a little bit unique. And it honestly takes a unique person to be open and willing to do that. Um, so this network has been able to create these small groups where we come together and spend time and space working together, sitting with each other. And we don't try to solve each other's problems. That's impossible. But just to have a place to go where you feel heard and seen and validated was so nourishing. I am super excited to introduce this program to you guys, and if it's something that really resonates with you, please let me know, because I am working to create a facilitated group over the next little bit, and I would love to have you there. So without further ado, here are Amee and Laura. Okay, we're recording. Welcome, welcome, Amee and Laura. I'm just so thrilled to have you here. Thank you so much for joining. Good to have you.
Thank you, Morgan. We're excited to be here.
It's so great to be here with you, Morgan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just so excited to get into our conversation, but I just want you to first take a minute to introduce yourself and give us just the short snippet about Good Grief Network, and then we're going to dive into a little bit more about what it is and how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Laura Schmidt. I am the founding director of Good Grief Network. Where to even start? Basically, what we do is we create brave containers for people who are experiencing collective grief to have a space to come together and talk about it through the frame of 10 different subjects or steps. So it's a 10-week program. We prioritize small groups to make it an intimate experience and really relearn how to see people and build community. And I'm one of the facilitators, and Amee is.
I'm Amee Lewis-Reau, and I'm a co-founder and a facilitator of the Good Grief Network. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And of course, I'm a graduate of the 10-step program. I went through this last fall and into the early winter, and I found it to be such a profound experience, because I went from feeling very, very alone in the feelings of grief and loss that I am kind of experiencing as I do my work in the environmental field and kind of learn more and more about what's happening with climate change. And I have not always known how to create community that is supportive of that grief process, because who wants to sit around and talk about the heavy, big feelings? Like, oh yeah, me too. But it turns out like that actually is a really important space to work in and explore. And so I'm so grateful to you, both of you, for founding this program and creating these spaces. Really been powerful. So tell me more about the origin story of the Good Grief Network and how it came to be.
Yeah, well, every story is an entire branch structure, and we could be here all day, but to really sum it up, I was an environmental studies student, and in undergrad, I read the IPCC for the first time in 2009 and realized the severity of the predicament, or what I perceived at the time to be the severity of the predicament, and still didn't see much action happening to take the problem seriously enough. I didn't see any national leadership, and that started to worry me. I also saw a lot of problems with species extinction, and I really like animals, not just like them, I love them, and they saved my life in many different ways. And so I was really trying to position my life in a way that could protect the most amount of species and make sure that they can stay here and be protected. And that led me to realizing that species management, wildlife management, is really a people management problem and not really an animal management problem. Yeah. And so I transitioned gears from environmental studies and biology to environmental humanities. And Terry Tempest Williams was the director of my program at the time. And she blew open so many doors for me that were previously stonewalled for a number of reasons. But she really taught me how to be and to guide my path with courage. And in graduate school, I started asking the question that if we wanted to look at really hard things that many people weren't talking about or in support of, how do we sustain ourselves? And I did a bunch of research. I did a few interviews with scientists, activists, teachers, anybody who was willing to look at climate change. That was my main focus. But looking at climate change and sort of not breaking down, what skills, what tools do we need so that we don't break down and that we can keep doing the good work? And then after I graduated, I put that work aside for a little bit because I got a job at an environmental nonprofit and thought I was still doing the good work. And after a few years there, became jaded that we still weren't taking the severity of the predicament seriously enough. we really needed to get moving on this climate change predicament 20 years ago. And for us to be sitting in the environmental movement, still calling for 10% more renewables in our portfolios, in the next 5 years, it's not going to cut it. The problems are much too severe. So Amee and I were living together at the time, and I mentioned to her that I have kind of a format. I have an idea, and I asked her if she would help me put it into the world. And 3 years later, we are a worldwide movement of people coming together and really trying to figure out what it means to be alive in this time and place, how we can discover our personal agency, and really importantly, lean into these really painful feelings that our culture tells us is really taboo and we shouldn't be exploring. We can talk about this more in a second, but I've really discovered that it's through feeling these feelings and leaning into them that new solutions emerge, probably ones that we haven't even thought of because we were so walled off from them within ourselves.
Yeah. And I feel like Good Grief is the work I was born to do. My background was more human rights activism. But I had my first mental breakdown when I was 21 and was strongly encouraged to get out of activism, to get back on my feet. And what would happen is I had treatment-resistant depression, and I would start to get well enough and I'd think, I want to get back into activism. And every time I got back into activism, it made the depression worse. And I just didn't feel strong enough to be an activist on the front lines anymore. And it was like, if I can't be on the front lines, does that mean I can't be part of the movement? How do I continue doing what I'm doing? And then meanwhile, my best friend, now wife, had developed these steps, and I had even gone to a couple Al-Anon meetings with her back in North Carolina many years ago. And so I had seen the healing that comes through when we have these ritual and yet secular spaces that are somehow a cross between the two. And I said, I want to get on board, and I did. And it is work that brings such meaning to my life that I can't imagine doing anything else. I feel like it's what I'm here to do.
Yeah. Well, both of you just bring such richness and beauty into this world through pulling these pieces together for all of us. And I'm just, like I said, so grateful for the work that you are creating. And so it's really, I love the way that you have broken down the 10 steps. So it's like usually about 10 to 12 weeks that these groups start together. And I think in my group, we had people from Australia, all over the US. I mean, it was really an international perspective and an opportunity to connect with people that, I would never have otherwise been able to meet and share some very strong and intimate conversations with. It was really, really magical experience. Do you want to talk about the big feelings? Like why, what are your thoughts on why? Well, I mean, we don't want to feel them. They're just big and icky and they hurt. And so we really, as a society, I think as a human race, we do a lot to try to get away from and move away from actually feeling our feelings. And I think so much of what I see women in my community, I can just kind of speak from my own personal space, or maybe just speak from what I used to do or have been known to do, is would go super busy and just do all the things. I have recently released alcohol from my life. And so I've had a couple years now of not drinking. And I recognize now how even just a minimal amount of drinking was really contributing to trying to squelch some of those big feelings. The Netflix binging, I'm still a little guilty of that. You got to have some vices.
It's right.
But, we do a lot. Shopping, consuming, even, consuming information, like good information, spiritual information. I've been known to do that. So we do a lot to try to distract and move ourselves away. In what ways, does this process bring you into kind of greater examination of emotions, and what role do you think they have in this whole process that we're going through?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I have two reflections that are toppling over. May I
Yeah,
go
please
first?
go. Please go.
The first one is that, you know, many of the human cultures around the world have rituals and ways to create space for those heavy feelings. You know, we come together every Friday and we do a dance together or something like that. Here in the Western paradigm, there aren't very many rituals available to us. And then that is coupled with this absolute fear and phobia of these heavy feelings. You know, anything that brings up discomfort within us, we sort of distract away from or avoid altogether, as you mentioned. And it is because they're absolutely painful. And so until we can have some sort of cultural recognition of the need to feel these heavy feelings, we have to take it upon ourselves. And it's really helpful in small groups. It's helpful to be witnessed when you're processing. It's helpful to be held up in community, and also we're incredibly social creatures. And so if we're actually trying to make change in our lives, it's really hard to change by yourself. You need the support of community, and it's helpful if you know other people are along for the ride. That's my first reflection. My second one is 12 years ago when Amee and I became friends, I told her that I almost haven't felt anything for a decade. So I've come a pretty far along since that time.
She was bragging about it, I might add.
I don't need to feel, I'm good.
It's true. It's true. Well, and I mean, I came from a tremendous amount of trauma. There was no feelings that were modeled for me at all, like, unless it was anger. And anger isn't particularly a safe feeling for many of us. You know, many of us go to great lengths to try to avoid that, especially women in this culture. And so, you know, it wasn't really until my friendship with Amee that she kind of asked me after I bragged about it, like, is that the life you want to lead? Like, is that really, you're proud of that? And it really made me reassess, like, who do I want to be? I have some agency now that I made it through my traumatic childhood. Like, how do I want to transform my wounds into something better? And so if I'm being honest, I am still pretty emotionally muted. I am learning, I am processing, I am practicing, I am undoing 20 years of a lot of damage. And so we often say that we created the group that we need, and it's absolutely true. Like, we've put ourselves in a space where we get to talk about feelings and what it means to be alive and meaning making constantly. And so, yeah, those are my first two initial thoughts, and I'm sure y'all have many more.
I loved it so much I forgot what the question was. I was so on board with what Laura was saying.
Yeah. Laura, I like that observation, is that, you know, we teach what we need to learn, or we create the space that we need. And I think that's so true for me as well, is like, you know, I talk a lot about like the big feelings and feeling your feelings, but like, I still really have strong resistance to actually like moving through and experiencing them. And I've had to like actually train myself. Like, I used to be an athlete. I guess I still am an athlete, but a competitive athlete. And I often think about the training that I put in to be like an elite level cyclist. And I put in like 20 or 30 hours a week of training. And now I'm like, that's like the type of training I have to do for my emotional health. And, you know, it accumulates and builds over time, but it's not like you're going to do one training and go run a marathon. It's something that you have to kind of take time. And that's so true also for emotions and understanding these big feelings.
Yes, I love that analogy, and wish we would think of feeling our feelings as something like exercise more often.
Yeah.
I'm left thinking that the reason we don't, you know, it's almost more socially acceptable to work out and to feel your muscles being sore and sort of complain like, oh, my muscles are so sore. But when you enter into a healing space and really become vulnerable and have that vulnerability hangover, or you open to this deep sadness within you, or the grief or the hopelessness, and you have some lingering effects, it's sort of like that you're not supposed to share that. That's supposed to stay inside of you. You know, like, why is it okay that we can exercise and be held in that public space together? And it's like, yeah, you went to the gym. Of course, you're going to be a little sore. You haven't moved for 3 weeks, you know, but we enter into these spaces and like, I'm really leaning into my anger right now. And people are like, oof, I don't want to hear about that.
I'll turn and walk the other way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's not welcome here. And it's because we haven't been taught how to sit with other people without fixing them. And I think that's another thing we really try to promote in Good Grief is you come as you are, you share what you want to share. And as long as you're not resorting to some sort of hate speech, you're absolutely welcome to say anything that you want to, you know, like you can come with your ugliness, you can come with your rawness, you can come with anything and we'll hold you and we'll hear you and we'll bear witness to your experiences.
Yeah. There's such a power there to be in that space with people moving through emotions and in the vulnerability. And one of the things I'm thinking about as we're talking about this is a lot of people, we started doing this digitally because we live in a rural place before COVID-19. But now we hear a lot of folks in this field saying like, well, can you facilitate this experiment or this experience digitally? But one of my favorite things to tell people is you can actually see in meetings that when someone's given a vulnerable share, they kind of have this oh shit moment where they're like, and you like see their shoulders lift, you see this like reaction, and even if it's subtle, you know, they might be a little bit better trained in playing it cool than I am, you know, sometimes, but you still see a physical shift on the screen. But you also see in our groups, after someone shares, everyone says thank you with your name. So thank you, Amee. And when that group thank you comes in, they relax. And you can visibly see it. In fact, I'm too in the moment when I'm facilitating to be able to do this, but I would love to be able to take pictures of those moments to capture the, oh shit, I shared something really vulnerable with the shift of, wow, I'm being held in community in my vulnerability.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It's so beautiful and so profound to show up in a space where others are willing to hear you say what's truly, truly on your mind and in your heart. And even if it is dark or ugly, and well, look who it is. Excuse me for a minute. Hold on one second. Okay, sorry, we just had to pause for a little daughter interruption. This is being recorded when everybody's at home. But where we were going was just this sense of profound connection that happens when people show up with their vulnerability. And for me, I could share these heavy things that are on my heart about the loss and challenges that I am kind of experiencing. And when you hear that, yes, I hear you, thank you, that sense of connection, you feel so supported, like other people also are sharing this same experience and are having the same thoughts and same feelings, same reaction, that you're really not alone, that you truly are in a community, in a space with others. Really, really beautiful.
Yeah, well, and in, you know, in a certain way, our vulnerable sharings lead the way for an emergence of new ways of thinking and new ways of being. Because Morgan, if you're bringing your experiences and you share something and I reflect on that and say, you know, Morgan, when you said that, it made me think this. And then Amee says, when Laura said this, it made me think of this. And we get a sort of spiraling of information and knowledge and ways of being in this time that like we've been trying, because we're in the process of writing a book very slowly. But you know, we keep coming back to like, how do we even explain what happens in these meetings other than alchemical? Like something emerges, something magical, and all those words don't even seem suitable or spot on, you know?
Yeah, I definitely know that's. I'm excited to hear that you're writing a book.
Yeah, thank you. We are too.
Yeah. It is a slow and arduous process from what I hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Faulty starts are real. Yeah, it's a process.
Yeah. So
great self-compassion along the way.
That's right. I'm leaning very heavily onto my self-compassion practice recently as I am navigating this whole experience of you know, homeschooling 2 children and being at home and all that. It's had to dig very deep into some of the, I use a lot of Tara Brach, the RAIN method, which I love her. And then also Kristen Neff is another one that I've really enjoyed. working with. So one of the things I was hoping we could chat a little bit about is one of the steps in the practice or in the program is practice being with uncertainty. And so many people are finding themselves in the middle of so much uncertainty, and it is deeply, deeply uncomfortable for humans who we're so used to like going the same route to work every day and the routines, and that's like we get into this rhythm, and it's been hard for me. Like I feel like every day I wake up and it's exactly the same and totally different, and I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And it's been a really weird space to sit in. And I think that most people don't like uncertainty, and yet it is like truly what we have. We really see it right now. It's like in our face. It's always there. It's just right now we're really seeing it. So I'm wondering if you might be open to chatting a little bit about your perspectives on uncertainty.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would love to share a story from a conversation Laura and I were having recently, and I was talking about how I feel like I'm falling and I just keep waiting to find my footing. But then another, external event happens, another crisis is here, more grief comes, into my body for whatever reason, and I just can't find my footing. And so I said, well, I guess I better learn to dance while falling, because I'm not sure the footing's going to come with the way our world is in such uncertain times right now. And I can't control the uncertainty. I can show up for it. And so I really believe in that dance while falling. And I don't think it's a coincidence that sort of the anxiety and extra grief of all of this, I had to increase I do a daily dance practice. And it's going to sound trivial that I took it from 60 minutes to 80 minutes a day. And that 20 minutes of extra time to really move my body has really, I think I'm living it. I think and I'm not there yet. I mean, God, as you know, no one likes uncertainty. It's terrifying. I want to find my footing, but if I'm not going to be able to find it, can I at least be dancing? I'd rather be dancing,
Yeah. Well, and it's making me think that our grasp or our grasping for certainty was an illusion anyway. And for many of us, that illusion has now been shattered. And we now need to reckon with what that means. Somehow in this paradigm, we got it in our heads that if we do all the right things, if we get the right job, if we have a steady income, that we can like ward off accidents and sicknesses and like that we somehow can become immortal. Like we can take away the very nature that we're finite beings having a finite experience. And coronavirus has been a direct confrontation that we have a certain amount of security. Many of us, some of us don't have any sort of security, especially right now, like not getting paychecks and not having food, not having safe places to be. But for those of us who are privileged and do have those safe spaces and food, it's a direct confrontation that eventually we'll die. And we have to learn how to be more comfortable facing our own mortality and the mortality of everything. I just recently wrote an essay that said, everything you know and love will die. And I don't think we talk about that enough. I think that because death is so painful, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. Like we hide and we avoid all those things that hurt too bad, and death is so painful. Many of us have experienced the death of a loved one, and it just breaks your heart wide open, and you don't know what's real. You don't know how to keep going. You don't know why the world hasn't stopped for everyone when it stopped for you. And yet maybe those feelings could be managed better if we had a realistic expectation that everybody we love, everything we know will fall away eventually. It's not being sort of nihilistic. It's just being realistic. It's having a realistic understanding of we're animals. When did we forget that we're human animals? We very much fit into these natural processes, and I can make as much money as I want. Well, that's not true. In theory, I can make as much money as I want, but at the end of a certain course, I'll die, and we'll have to deal with that. And I think this death anxiety goes hand in hand with uncertainty. And I think our quest for certainty is really bound up with that denial of death. And until we can face that, we're going to be emotionally muted. Until we can face that, we'll be emotionally muted.
Right on. And I wanted to add to that this death anxiety is tied up with our fear of uncertainty. Uncertainty brings out our reminder of our own mortality. And I used to get scared to say it so bluntly, because then I feel like there are so many great experts talking about death anxiety, and I'm not one of them. And it like brings out my own insecurity. But what I can confidently say is I've started telling participants that my wife, I'm a little biased, but I think she's a resource genius. She's been collecting resources that make her want to stay alive since she was a teenager, and she has a brilliant list of those resources. But I tell our good grievers now, if you're only going to take one thing out of our resources, watch the film Flight from Death. It explains death anxiety, it explains terror management theory, and that you can consciously be aware of your death and how our death anxiety influences our behavior, or you can let it unconsciously control you, and it's going to come out in neurotic and unhealthy ways. So Flight from Death, can't recommend it enough.
Well, and I feel like we need to tell your listeners or watchers also that this film is maybe 10 years old or something. So it's a little dated, but the research is still pretty spot on. It's a pretty eye-opening documentary.
Yeah. Yeah, your program has a tremendous amount of resources that accompanies it, and just you can really dive into it, immerse yourself into so much amazing research and just resources that you've been able to pull together. So thank you so much for doing that, because it's been a wealth of knowledge that I continually go back to, and you can't get it all in the first round. But yeah, it's been really, really amazing. Well, and I love this conversation because we get into death. I'm like, yeah, this is amazing. And it just really brings to mind the importance of the concept that I really work with a lot, which is acceptance and just loving what is. And so hard. That's a practice, not something that comes very naturally to me. But just this deep sense of acceptance, and I don't know. And I'm just now starting to work with the term surrender. I have not been comfortable with it until very, very recently, that I've started to get a clearer sense of what that means for me. But acceptance is the one that kind of I've gone to. It's been an interesting path.
That's profound, and you're exploring a lot of self-awareness right here with us, and I'm grateful for that. There are levels of acceptance, I think, that we can talk about. And, our first step is accept the severity of the predicament. And oftentimes we try not to tell people participating in our program where we're at with our acceptance, because every time, I'll speak for myself, but every time I come back to these steps, I'm at a different level of awareness and acceptance. And I don't know, I think for me, it is a practice of being in that acceptance, of understanding the realistic situations of where we find ourselves. Climate change is just one impact that we're seeing right now. And of course, now there's COVID, but there's massive species extinction and ecosystem death. There's huge wealth distribution issues. You don't have to look very far before you're seeing a huge systemic issue that needs to be addressed. And it's not just climate change. Even if we stopped all carbon emissions now, which is it's not going to happen. But even if we did that, there are still issues that are having us face this uncertainty in our mortality. I'm so blown away at how every time I enter into a good grief space or practice the 10-step program, my level of awareness, my level of acceptance just deepens, like one step deeper. Amee and I often just jokingly, because we need some lightness, right? We spend a lot of time working on these very heavy things, so we're actually quite silly. We're pretty silly people, but almost every day we always say, is this real life? Real life?
Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that you bring lightness and silliness. I actually have been having to read a book on how to play. Like I have to teach myself this because it's not something that comes very easily to me. But I think it's such an important part of this world and this process of like, yes, you experience these big feelings, you sit in these big ideas, but you got to bring that joy and spark to your day to day in order to kind of create that sense of resilience within yourself.
Yeah. Well, because why else are we alive?
Right.
Right? Like if we're not having meaningful experiences that bring joy to our day, like is there a point?
Right. Love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been mentioning it every interview, and so I started to get insecure about this, but Adrienne Marie Brown's pleasure activism has completely transformed me and how I see this work, and she talks about the importance of finding pleasure and joy to help sustain us as we do this work, and how it actually can lead us into where our power lies when we follow our pleasure and our joy. And she explains it so well. And so I realized I'm going to keep plugging her every time.
I love it. That's a whole new
world needs right now.
rabbit.
And yes, so Adrienne Marie Brown, pleasure activism.
Oh, that's great. I cannot wait to like dig into that a little bit more and take a look at that. It sounds very much up my alley. So I have one more question. Oh, I'm sorry. Laura, did you have something else?
Well, I wanted to create some space, you know, because I made the comment about like, if we're not feeling this joy and this meaning, why are we alive? But I also wanted to create some space and bring in the fact that if we're not tending to our heavy feelings, if we're not actually feeling the grief and the sorrow and the despair and the hopelessness, then the capacity for which we can feel joy and meaning is also muted. And that's why we dig into these heavy feelings. It's not because we're masochists. It's not because we like feeling bad. Like we dig into those heavy feelings because we know that we want to be alive in this time and place, and that there's still so much beauty and meaning and joy to witness. And that if we're not facing these really painful feelings, we're not able to actually appreciate the moment or the beauty or the joy. And I just wanted to bring that back in full circle.
That's good. Yeah, thank you.
In empty pursuit of meaning and joy without feeling our feelings, it ends up being addiction, right? It ends up being a distraction or an addiction, and not actually really truthfully being present with that joy.
Yeah, I think that's so important that when you numb out your feelings you don't like, you're also numbing out your capacity to feel the joy. The other thing that I think is really interesting, Brene Brown talks about how joy is one of the most vulnerable feelings that you can experience. And so, you have to kind of practice actually moving into joy and not having things come up and sabotage your kind of sense of space in that place in that emotion. It's a very, yeah.
Brene Brown has informed a lot of this work. A lot of the centered work is directly from her.
It's true. And some of the thought leaders we're looking to, we've been really impressed by how they're also bringing in their own personal vulnerability, and it seems to be furthering the dialogue even more. And they all cite her. And so it's like she freed something in us, and now we're all running with it.
I know. She is pretty remarkable. Yeah. So I have maybe just one. I don't want to end our conversation. This is like absolutely amazing. And I think I could talk to you for forever and ever. So I hope that you'll come back sometime again. But one question that I've been asking people recently is, if COVID-19 could be a turning point for us, if we could allow this to be the place where we pivot or change or let something go or move, what would be the thing that we would hope would really change as we move forward and start to integrate back into normal life, whatever that is going to be, from your perspective? It's a big question.
It is, and it's a brilliant question, and I have a million answers, but I think that the easiest answer that came to mind, that's easy to discuss in the time frame that we have, is for me the idea that we have to work meaningless, unfulfilling jobs to create some sort of salary to pay our bills. You know, it just seems so monotonous, and it's actually taking away from our experience of living. Many of us don't even like our jobs, and yet we're forced to be there for 40, 60, 80 hours a week. Like, if we can take one thing away that starts to kind of raise our consciousness about what it means to be alive in this time and place, I hope that it's a desire that our time is meaningful, and that we're selling our time for money to pay for things that maybe we don't even want or need. That's my easy answer.
I loved it, and now I'm forgetting what the original question was again. This happened where
That's okay.
lost in her element, and I can feel it, and I'm like, yes, and I'm right on board, and then I'm like, I lost the question though.
So the question was, if this COVID-19 experience of stay at home could be a turning point, what would you kind of wish for the change moving forward, whether it's letting something go or bringing something in? Or
I think accepting that the systems are not serving us, and just a full acceptance of that and what that means, and how to come together in community and actually believe in our ability to create systems that will serve us.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's good.
That
Yeah.
felt great.
I love these. Oh my gosh, such a great insight, and two brilliant minds here.
Great question.
Thank you.
So how can people learn more about Good Grief Network or find a group if they're interested, and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, well, the easiest thing is goodgriefnetwork.org. That's our website. And, you know, we've started recently trying to connect on Mighty Networks. So that's goodgriefnetwork.mn.co. I can email you the web address so that it's easily seen. But also what's happening right now is Amee and I are in a great transition of restructuring Good Grief to try to figure out how to bring it to more people. So our past model is that you can get one of our manuals and host your own series with those who are near you, and now because of coronavirus far as well. But we're seeing a real need for honing in on the skills of facilitating. And so we want to focus on training those people who want to sit in spaces and aren't quite sure how to do that or don't feel empowered enough to do that yet. And so we are in a bit of a transition period. We are hoping on Good Grief Network's end to roll out new 10-step meetings every month. So if you can't make May's, you know, look back in June, look back in July, and we'll keep doing that to hold space for you to join us. But for the next little bit, Amee and I will be writing a book and trying to create a facilitator training.
Yeah, which I'm really excited about, both of them.
I'm very excited about that too. That's great. So wonderful. So I will help people connect to you through the website and social media a little bit.
Although do you want to, Facebook is an overly toxic place, and I know that many of us go there, but you know,
we do.
That's one of my addictions. One of my vices is Facebook. And we do have a presence on Facebook, but I'm honestly trying to phase it out, especially before the election. We just recently saw the documentary called The Great Hack, and we highly recommend it for everyone. But
it's on Netflix.
We give all of our data away to these big social media sites, and then they use it to market to us and manipulate us. And I'm not cool with that, you know? So you very much can connect with us on Facebook, but maybe
you're moving more over to Mighty Networks.
We are trying to.
Yeah, got it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time and for the great work that you're putting out in this world. It's so desperately needed. It has been very, very heart fulfilling for me, and I really hope that it can really help and connect others as well.
That's great.
Thank you so much. It's been such a gift to spend this time with you, Morgan.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. All right. Bye.